right, tonight I am going to introduce Bethany Chagnon. Bethany is the Deputy Refuge Manager and Biologist for the Stillwater National Wildlife Refuge Complex. She grew up in a small New England town, spending most of her days getting muddy or tromping around in the woods. She spent much of her career studying forest ecology with a special interest in bats. After completing an undergraduate degree in environmental biology, she migrated around the country like the birds she now studies. She completed a master's degree in zoology and physiology at the University of Wyoming, where her research was focused on animal behavior. She completed fieldwork in a variety of ecosystems, including yeah, I never know which one that is. Southern Appalachia, the northeastern temperate forests, the tropical jungles of the Mariana Islands, and the coastal wetlands in Hawaii, before finally landing here in the northern Nevada desert. She's found her home with the Fish and Wildlife Service and has been at the Stillwater National Wildlife Refuge Complex in Fallon for about 5 years. Managing wetlands for wildlife is a balancing act vital to supporting our wildlife populations. The Lahontan Valley wetlands are part of a crucial network that provides the right habitat in the right place at the right time for all of Nevada's wildlife. Please welcome Bethany Chagnon.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and thank you to the museum for inviting us to give a talk. I'm really excited to see some familiar faces. So I'm here today to talk about the birds and the National Wildlife Refuge System in Stillwater. But what I want everybody to leave with from my talk today is to have a newfound respect and appreciation for the beauty that's in your backyard. So there's also special thanks that goes out to some of the really talented local photographers who have let me use some of their gorgeous imagery that you'll see kind of sprinkled throughout my presentation today. So with that, I'll just give you a little trail map of what I'm hoping to discuss with you all today. First, I'm going to kind of set a foundation. I'll talk a little bit about the National Wildlife Refuge System and how it works. Then we'll talk about some of the refuges that you all have right in your own backyards. And then we'll talk about some of the specific species that use our refuges, because these refuges are for the birds. And then we'll talk a little bit about what it takes to manage a refuge. And I'll ask everybody to just, if you have any clarifying questions, something I say is unclear and you want me to kind of explain that a little better, feel free to just ask at any point. But if there's anything more in depth, let's hold our questions to the end, and I'll try to make sure I give everyone lots of time to heckle me at the end. So with that, the National Wildlife Refuge System, it's like just a park, right? How many people, I just want to poll the audience, how many people have been to a national park? So that's a good amount. Most of you guys are getting out and exploring. That's great. How many people have been to a National Wildlife Refuge? Actually, really good turnout, like pretty surprising. A little bit less than the parks, but a good amount of you have all been to a refuge. That's great. How many of you have been to Stillwater National Wildlife Refuge? Okay, so about all the people who have been to a refuge have gone to Stillwater, so that's good, because it's right there. And I can't tell you how many times I've met people who have lived in Fallon or lived in different areas that I've worked, and they've never been to the refuge that's right across the street from them. So I love seeing that so many of you are getting out there and exploring your public lands, and that's really great news. So real quickly, I'll talk a little bit about the National Wildlife Refuge System. I have some fun facts. So this is a map of the refuge system in the United States. There's 571 national wildlife refuges and 38 national wetland management districts. And this map is actually a little bit out of date because there's a new one that just popped up last month right here in Florida. And so that is the, oh, I have a laser pointer, which might make things easier. Am I gonna ruin it? Oh, there we go. So it's right there. the Gulf to Everglades conservation area. And now I've lost my mouse. Here we go. So, the other thing I like to point out to everybody is that there is at least one National Wildlife Refuge in all of the 50 states and 5 territories. And so we're managing over 859 million acres of land. So that's pretty massive when you actually think about it. The other thing is that each refuge is special. We're all each a little special snowflake. There's something special about each refuge, and why it is established can vary. So some are established for migratory birds, some are endangered species, some are protecting entire ecosystems. So there is something very specific for each refuge and why it's important and why it's really critical to save. The other thing that is interesting about the National Wildlife Refuge system is that each refuge contributes to a system. So while the park system is great, I love our sister agency. I just came back from spring break and we went to 2 national parks and 3 refuges. I like to visit them as well, but they have a different mission than us. They are not managed as a system. Kind of each park is on its own, doing its own thing. The refuge system is managed as one system. And I'll tell a little bit why that's important. It's because the ultimate goal is wildlife conservation. And so the refuges are a network of lands and waters that are established for the conservation, management, and restoration of fish and wildlife species and their habitats. And the thing about our mission that resonates so strongly with me is that wildlife conservation is happening for the benefit of present and future generations of Americans. And I think that's something that we should all be proud of. That's happening right in your backyard. And 2 reasons why I care so much about that is because those are my daughters, and I want to make sure that they have that same opportunity that I had growing up. And the National Wildlife Refuge System is doing that. So a little bit about the refuges in your backyard. Here we are, here's Fallon. Stillwater is right there. We also have Fallon National Wildlife Refuge. And over here in Pyramid Lake, we have Anaho Island. And so all 3 of those refuges are all kind of managed by just our small little team. And I'll talk a little bit more about each one of those refuges. So Stillwater National Wildlife Refuge, we are about 80,000 acres, and in wet years like last year and this year, we manage up to 20,000 acres of wetlands. So that's incredibly important when you're talking about one of the driest places, the driest state in the Union, and also one of the driest valleys within that state. It was established back in 1949, and so like I said, each refuge has its own purpose. We were established for migratory birds. Fallon, similarly, it was established a little bit earlier, 1931, but also for migratory birds, and that's about 18,000 acres. And Anaho Island. So this is probably a familiar picture for at least a couple of you here today. And that was established in 1913, and its purpose is slightly different, still to protect migratory birds, but also to protect colonial nesting species. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is so important. Fun fact, Anaho Island has the largest colony of American white pelicans in the West. And so, Anaho Island is important to protecting that specific piece of dirt. This picture here, each one of those little dots is a pelican nest there. So this is just an aerial of what we kind of look at when we're looking at the colony. And like I said, Anaho Island protects just where they're nesting, but it's so much more important to look at landscape conservation, not just that one little piece of dirt. And so I'll show you a little example. Here we have the actual range that these birds have to forage in order to have enough food to feed their young and raise birds to fledge. So they're going 100 kilometers out. And if you notice, 100 kilometers out, there's Stillwater National Wildlife Refuge, there's Fallon. There's a lot of really important wetlands that are crucial to protecting in order to support that pelican colony. And many of our visitors at Stillwater will often notice, well, there is a ton of pelicans out here. They're not nesting at Stillwater, but they're going out and they're foraging there, and then they're coming back and feeding their young at Anaho Island. And so this is just one example of why it's so important to have a refuge system and to kind of manage all of these pieces of land together. So Great Basin saline lakes and marshes, we've talked a little bit about why they're important, but they provide vital habitat for waterfowl, shorebirds, marsh birds, raptors, colonial nesting birds, bats, and they really are the oasis in the desert. So like I said, Nevada is the driest state in the union, and the Lahontan Valley is one of the driest valleys, and so it's really important to have all of these wetlands available to them throughout their life cycle. And so now I talked about why they're connected, why that's important. Let's talk a little bit about why these refuges are for the birds. So spring in Nevada is for migration. So here's a little example of what habitat connectivity looks like and why landscape conservation is so important. So Lahontan Valley wetlands, we are, sorry, I'm at a weird angle. We're like right about there, and then we have Pyramid Lake and Anaho Island right there. But you can see how important it is that all these wetlands are providing habitat for all of those different species at different times in their life cycle, right? So when we're very young, we learn birds fly north in the summer and they go south in the winter. But there's a lot of little places in between there that they're utilizing kind of at different stages in their life. So waterfowl are definitely one of our big species. Everybody goes out there. If you're a hunter, you've probably spent a lot of time out on that marsh looking for these guys. And so they're definitely using the wetlands and Stillwater National Wildlife Refuge and Carson Lake and Pasture when they're on their migration routes. But they're also spending a lot of time in the summer. So we have a lot of resident species who are also breeding and raising their young on the wetlands. So having that wetland habitat is important year-round. We also have shorebirds. So Lahontan Valley is actually designated as a Western Hemispheric Shorebird Reserve Network. So that's a lot of words, right? But what does that mean? It means it's a critically important spot in the globe to provide habitat for these birds. And for that slide I showed you earlier, showing all that connectivity, most of these shorebirds are all kind of converging between here and the Great Salt Lake. And so we have 28 different species of shorebirds that can be found here in Lahontan Valley. But for avocets, which I have pictured here, and long-billed dowitchers, their entire global population, Lahontan Valley has 10% of their entire global population. So you can imagine if something happened, if we lost our wetlands here, that would have a drastic impact on those species of birds. And so colonial nesting waterbirds, these are probably a familiar face to many people in the valley. Everybody kind of sees these guys hanging out in the alfalfa fields and stuff in the spring and the summer. And these are using the refuge, using the wetlands. They breed here. So white-faced ibis, great egrets, snowy egrets, great blue herons, they all call the refuge home. So I want to show you a slide. Last year we were lucky enough to actually satellite tag a few of these guys. And so like I mentioned, some of them are traveling vast distances. So this guy was tagged back in August of last year, and he traveled all the way down to Sinaloa, Mexico here. So that's pretty drastic migration. There's definitely some birds that go even further, but that was pretty good. But even within the same species, there's a lot of variation, right? So this guy traveled all the way down. This guy never left the refuge. He was pretty happy. He didn't even cross the street. He didn't even make it to my office. So some individuals are spending their whole lives here, and I don't know the demographic data on this. He might be just a young bird who just hasn't figured it out yet, and he's decided that the refuge is just, it's the best. There's no need to go anywhere else. But maybe when it comes time to breeding, he'll figure out he maybe needs to expand his horizons. But for now, the refuge is the place to be. So here's just a snapshot of a couple of individuals. I showed you that other slide, how birds are kind of moving across the landscape. And so, like I mentioned, it's important that we're providing habitat at all the different life cycles for these birds, including spring in Nevada is for breeding or love. And I'll let Sir David Attenborough do this because he's a little bit more eloquent than I am sometimes. And so that is something you can actually see on the refuge if you go out there in the mornings. And right now is the time they're getting ready to breed, and so that's a common sight out there. So you can see that at Carson Lake, you can see that at Stillwater. How cool is it to have a little bit of Nat Geo clip that's happening right there in your backyard? So after they pair up, the next thing that comes is babies, right? So here's an example of what we have, waterfowl. This is a mother canvasback with all of her little ducklings kind of following her around. And then this is actually a western grebe, but they're very similar, of the similar species to the pair that we just saw. And you can often see them out there on nests too. So sometimes their nests are pretty obvious, and sometimes it just looks like a little floating mat that could easily just be a little bit of debris that pushes up against the cattails. But if you're looking and you're paying attention, you can definitely spot them out there. And I have to mention, because I am a bat biologist, we also have bats, a lot of bats. And so having the right habitat and having the right foraging spaces for these creatures is definitely important. And for some reason, Stillwater seems to be the favorite spot for young mothers. We get a lot of bats that come in, and they'll actually form like maternity colonies in some of our bat boxes and along some of the cliff faces and stuff on the refuge. But then as soon as the babies kind of take off on their own and they learn to fly, then they kind of move on to a different area, or they spread out a little bit more. But during this time of year, when they're starting to have their babies, they are in pretty large congregations. So that's just an example of our bat boxes and some of the species that you see. This is a Myotis species. And spring is also for wetlands. So one of the important things about having the refuge and managing the refuge is trying to make the right habitat in the right place at the right time for the different species. And so we try to call this, or we call this like the field of dreams style of management, right? So Kevin Costner had to make an appearance. But it's really hard. It's a balancing act, right? You have to manipulate water so that you're growing the right type of vegetation in the right place to provide food or to provide cover, and different habitat needs are going to be addressed differently. So for species that are out there foraging in mudflats and they're looking for insects to eat, or they're looking for vegetation, that's going to need to look different than the mama duck who's trying to find a nice safe place to nest and raise her ducklings. So how do you make everybody happy? It's kind of impossible. The older I get, I realize I'm not going to make everybody happy, right? But in the habitat world, we call it a wetland mosaic. So we try to do a little bit of everything. We have some deep water, we have some shallow water, we have some mud flats, we have some cattail, we have duckweed that's growing up in there. And so we try to make sure that our wetlands are looking like that. It's a little bit of everything, but it's kind of hard to do that every time, right? So spring is for management. This is a very busy time for us this time of year. And like I said, it's a balancing act. So it's not going to look perfect on every wetland unit every year, but we try to rotate through and provide the right management, and then it kind of progresses over the course of a couple of years. So it's kind of roughly like a five-year management cycle. And then we have a big year like last year, and now everything's on the same schedule, so that kind of throws a wrench in everything, right? But the refuge stays busy, and we do a lot of different things, and we kind of have our own version of like spring cleaning. So, what does it take to manage a refuge? I'm going to steal an analogy from Carl Understadt, our project leader. It's like owning a house. Think of what it's like to own a home, right? What do you have to do? You might need a new roof on your house. You might need to bring the truck to get an oil change. Your grass needs to get watered, it needs to get mowed. You have a garden to weed. Think of all those things you do as a homeowner and then scale it up to 80,000 acres. And all the facilities and all the vehicles and all the heavy equipment and everything that we have that we need to do our jobs. So Stillwater is, like I said, 80,000 acres. We have 35 miles of canals. We have 18 miles of levee, 128 miles of road, 71 water control structures, 27 parking lots, 15 boat launches, and buildings and vehicles and all the other things. So we're a small team, but we kind of just keep on it and keep managing it. But it does take a lot. And so talking about wetlands specifically and what we're doing on the wetlands, in addition to all that other stuff, our primary thing is gardening for duck food. So here's sago pondweed, here's a close-up of it. And this is like kind of the bread and butter. It provides really great habitat for like wetland insects, which are also going to be feeding your shorebirds and like your nesting ducks really need a lot of protein, and so they'll be eating all the insects and stuff that are in here. But then they'll also be eating the tubers, and those are nice calorie dense, like eating a big pile of like potatoes, right? Lots of calories get stocked up and ready for winter migration, so it's really important. And so the interesting thing, I think we all know in Nevada, is that we go through these drought and flood cycles, right? So wet and dry. And the interesting thing is that sago pondweed thrives on that. If we just put a lot of water out there and we keep it wet for like 10 years, our sago production actually goes down. It actually needs that natural disturbance. It actually needs to dry out. So a lot of times when you dry out the wetland, the next year it just goes gangbusters. It's the best habitat you could ask for, right? But what happens is you dry that out, the soil dries, you get these deep cracks in the soil, right? When things dry out and you see the playa, you have these deep cracks. And that's what aerates the soil and provides like germination for some of these seeds. So as production goes down, then you dry it out, and then that's what it looks like. Some of the other things, strategies, we, the team, will all take a look at what we're doing, where the water is, and we kind of come up with a plan for the year. So like I said, we're on like a 5-year sort of cycle. So most years, on those dry years and those middle like snowpack years, we don't have enough water to put water in every single unit. So we kind of rotate through. So maybe the west side of the refuge will be wet for 2 or 3 years, and then we kind of start to shift it over to the east side, and then those will be wet for a couple of years. And so it just kind of shifts through, and so that way we're ensuring that we have those dry years to really stimulate a lot of sago growth, and then as it declines, then it's time to move on to another wetland. And so here's just an example. I don't expect anyone to see most of this, but each one of those dots is a water control structure. And so moving water across the landscape can be really challenging. Like I said, we have 35 miles canal and 71 different water control structures. And so it takes a lot of maintenance, but it's actually a really elegant design. It's pretty interesting. We're not using pumps to move this water. We're doing basic flood irrigation like what everybody else is doing in the valley. And all of this is just being done by gravity. So high elevation down here on the south, and it just flows north. And then once you get up here, there's like no elevation change. Everything is kind of flat, but that's kind of cool because it gives you the opportunity to do a lot of fun things. You can make water go wherever you want. You just have to bring it up a little bit over here, and then it will flow where you wouldn't normally think water being able to flow, like almost upstream. So yeah, lots of Lots of interesting things we can do, and that's a vital part of our management strategy, and lots of moving parts. The other thing we do, especially this time of year, is we do some burning. So after we dry out a wetland unit, we might go in and we might burn. To really get down into the cattail to prevent like giant monocultures of just cattail stands, you really need it to be very, very dry. So a unit might have to be dry for like 2 years, and you might not be able to have any water in those surrounding units, because everybody around here probably knows the water table is so high. So you need things really, really dry, otherwise it won't get down into the rhizomes. But that being said, you don't need those really intense burn either. Sometimes just a light burn, just to slick off the top, is enough to get a lot of growth from some of the other vegetation. So like sedge or some of these seed-bearing vegetation that the ducks really love. It provides a lot of protein. It's really great for nesting birds. Some of those lighter burns will produce some of that type of vegetation growth. And sometimes we have to spray. So sometimes going through and doing a spray and then following up with a burn the next year is just kind of what we need to really create that mosaic landscape that we were talking about. And so these are all different tools in the toolbox that make sure and help us ensure that Stillwater National Wildlife Refuge complex is for the birds. And so, like I said, we are a small staff, but we are a mighty staff. And so our project leader, Carl Understad's been here for about 15 years in the Valley. It's myself. We have an administrative officer who just started, who makes sure we all get paid and make sure we have all the tools we need to do our job. We have 3 wage grades. We have a crew of YCC, so we have some of the local high school students come and work with us during the summer, and our YCC leader, Keith, who works at the school as well. So it's nice to have some of our staff here in the room. And we get a ton of volunteers, so they've been really vital in making sure that we have the support we need to go out and do our jobs. And we're doing a shorebird survey actually Thursday, and so I have a whole army of people coming out to help me count birds, or we have people who will show up in office and help make me some of these pretty maps that I showed you today. And so it takes a village really, and so just wanted to share how much work it goes in, and so you all appreciate just some of the complexities that people do to make this look as beautiful as it does. So that's all I really had, and I think we're doing okay on time still, but I wanted to open it up for questions if anybody wanted to chat, or if there's anything you want me to go back to, just let me know. Yeah?
I came in a little bit late, so if you already talked about this, my apologies. What impact has the canal that goes from Carson Lake up to the Wildlife Refuge, what impact does that have?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the Big Dig, so that does bring us a lot of water. So it does help maintain our water supply for sure. It's a little tricky because it's pretty slow flowing, and we don't really have a way, like if we needed to dry out Stillwater Point, which is kind of, let me see if I can pull that up. So Stillwater Point is down here on the south side of the refuge, and that's one of our bigger units. With the Big Dig, it comes in kind of like right here on the south side of it. We don't really have a way to turn off the water there. So like I said, it's really important to have those wet and dry cycles. Right now for that unit, we don't really have that ability anymore. But for the most part, we're using that as like a reservoir. So it's been kind of okay. And so it does supplement our water supplies for sure. But we haven't seen any like negative effects like water quality or anything like that. It's been pretty good. Yeah.
You have a picture of the Fallon Refuge, which is kind of up at the end of Indian Lakes Road area.
Mm-hmm.
I've not really seen much on the federal lands. Is there much in the way of habitat there?
That's a good question. So, so it's kind of an interesting. Let me see if I can go back. It's all the way at the beginning. So back when they were doing Public Law 101-618, which really gave the refuge the ability to purchase water and get water rights to, I went too far, there we go. So like you said, Fallon is here, that's 18,000 acres. And if you look, it's at the end of the Carson River. So that is kind of like a flood delta, right? So when they were working out the laws that gave us the ability to purchase water rights, Fallon was not actually included. So when we purchase water and we manage water, we can only manage it at Stillwater. But that doesn't mean that Fallon doesn't provide habitat. It just means it only provides certain habitat at certain times. So right now, Fallon is actually amazing. It's this beautiful floodplain and provides a lot of habitat. There's a ton of shorebirds out there. It's really gorgeous. But that happens during those flood cycles. And so it's actually, it's a very natural system, but we're not managing on like an annual basis because the next drought we go through, there's not going to be any water that we can put out there. Does that make sense? But it is doing, ecosystem-wise, it's doing what it's supposed to and serving as like flood control. Yeah.
Okay, since we're kind of near the beginning, on the previous slide where it shows all of the ones from different states, what is it about North Dakota? Because it seems like there's a really, really high per capita.
That is a great question. So the Dakotas are, they're these massive wetland management districts. And so the prairie poplar region, I don't know if anybody has ever heard that term used before, it's a massive breeding ecoregion. So there's just so many little wetland habitats that are just there, and it's kind of like the breeding area for like most of the birds in North America. Like for our flyway, a lot of them do go up to like Alaska, but for that central flyway and even the eastern flyway, a lot of them are going up to the prairie pothole region, and that's where they're actually breeding. And so that was one of kind of the first places where people really focused on creating national wildlife refuges, but it's not the only place. So like there are also another place that's kind of important for like where they migrate. This is a lot of the overwintering sites is down there in like Arkansas, Louisiana, and the wetlands and stuff down there along the Mississippi. So that's another little hot spot. But if you notice, a lot of them, because they are migratory bird refuges, a lot of them are coastal. Like on the East Coast, almost all of them are like right there on the coast. Yeah.
Can you point out the ones in Nevada, and also I don't see the Sheldon there.
I can, yeah. Well, let's see. I might have to get it at a different angle to get Sheldon. Yeah, so here we are-ish. So Stillwater, Fallon, Annabelle. Sheldon is technically in Region 1, so I think it's the boundary between, they're not really like, they don't follow state boundaries. I think the boundary is just kind of drawn thick. I think Sheldon should be right there because it's in Region 1. And then up here, we're in Region 8. It kind of bumps up. That's the Klamath Marsh kind of complex. So Upper Klamath, Lower Klamath, and Tule Lake. And those are big breeding sites as well for our flyway. Yeah, and so the nesting grebes, I'm sorry, I should be in front of the microphone. The nesting grebes, I believe, was done at Klamath. So, but like I said, some of those species are doing it right down here as well in our backyard. So, and sorry, you asked about the other Nevada ones. We also have Ruby Lake, if anybody's ever been to Ruby Lake. And then you have the desert complex. So there's Moapa Valley Desert National Wildlife Refuge, which is just outside of Vegas, and that is the largest national wildlife refuge in the lower 48. Once you bring Alaska into the equation, they kind of cheat, I think. They're just like, huge. Everything's big, right? But desert is the largest in the lower 48. And they're an endangered species refuge, so their purpose was primarily for bighorn sheep. And then you also have ash meadows, if anybody's ever been down there. That's a really great spot. I just brought my kids there this past week, and we had a blast. So there's some really special spots all around Nevada.
So mainly you deal with water, and that controls the plants and that controls the animals.
Yeah, totally.
So
So that's what
water is the big deal.
yeah, definitely. So the big thing about species is it's difficult to manage them, right? You can't really make them do what you want to do all the time. They're mobile, they move around, and once they leave, especially when you're talking about a migratory bird refuge, I have no control over what happens where they breed, and I have no control of what happens where they overwinter. So if they're losing habitats or like places and protections in those places, I can't really do much about it. And you bring up a good point because there's been a lot of research that's been people are kind of starting to really look at the long-term trends of birds in the United States, and they're estimating that we've lost like 3 billion birds. And not just migratory waterfowl or shorebirds, or it's a lot of different, it's passerines, it's some of the backyard birds that we've become accustomed to seeing a lot of. So to see that kind of loss of these species, some of it is just completely outside of our control. So what can I do? The only thing I can really do is just do the best on my piece of land and make sure when they are coming through and they're migrating that they have what they need when they're here. But it's challenging to be in this kind of work where like you can't manage, like we talk about landscape management and why it's so important, and some of that is just protection because I don't have a lot of control of what's happening in Mexico or Central America where they go, or up in Alaska. So yeah, it's tough.
You mentioned the shorebird survey, and I know the Pinyon Jay survey is going on, and also administrative work. How does somebody volunteer?
Oh, you can just reach out to me.
Or just walk in and go hi?
Yeah. No, I should have put I'll distribute my email and stuff. I should have put that on here or had cards with me. But yeah, so for the shorebird surveys, we partner with the Lahontan Audubon Society. So if you're familiar with them, I know that you've been out to Springwings,
Yeah.
I think.
I kind of know the answer.
Yeah. So
I want the
Springwings.
answer.
So Lahontan Audubon Society, they work very closely with us. So for like a lot of our monitoring, our bird surveys and stuff, they're a really great resource to reach out to them, and they'll get you trained up and then get you connected with me. But for any other thing, a lot of times like duck banding and stuff we do during the summer, and people just reach out to me, and I'm happy to get people involved wherever I can. Yeah.
I just wondered, funding-wise, is there anything that you really wish that was better funded in your program, or is it funding just fine, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky question for sure. I mean, I think that, like in general, I think we just are seeing fewer and fewer staff. And that's not just for national wildlife refuges, that's just across the board at national parks and elsewhere. So I think that's definitely a challenge. But I think that the National Wildlife Refuge system it's America's best kept secret, but to our detriment. I think a lot of people don't know that we're right there in your backyard in all 50 states and 5 territories. And like, it's such an amazing resource for the American public, and people just don't know that we're here. So I think that's our big problem, more so than like specific funding needs. I think we just need to do a better job of getting out there and making sure people appreciate what they have. Yeah, go ahead.
Why is there so little refugees in Arizona?
That's a good question. So a lot of them in Arizona are right on the Colorado River. So those were 2 that I went to last week. We did a big road trip. So I went to Lake Havasu and Belle Williams River. And so that's just on the Colorado River. So it might just be that it's not easy to see. And then there is one south of there, Kofa National Wildlife Refuge. And then I think there's a large one down here, just along the border, Cabeza Prieta, I think. So I think some of these western states are just really big, and they tend to, like I said, they tend to go where the birds are, or like what the resource is. And so they kind of get clustered, like the ones on, like, North Carolina it's not a western state, but it's pretty big for the East Coast, and most of the state looks empty, but it's just because they're all kind of clustered there. So sometimes it's just tricky because the scale, it's hard to pick them out. Because it also doesn't show you the boundaries. These are just like pinpoints. And so like Nevada doesn't look like there's a lot really, but desert is huge. So it doesn't show you the boundary, so it's a little bit misleading. But that is a really good question. Thanks. Yeah.
You had a photo of a coyote on one of your slides.
I did.
Are they the primary predator out there? What are the other predators, and is there any predator control?
So we don't do predator control out on the refuge. I would say they probably are the primary predators out there, but we do so you actually have a lot of birds that are predators of nests. So like crows and stuff will prey on duck nests and various things. But yeah, I would say that's probably our primary predator out there. We do have owls as well, but they're generally not going after eggs, but they will take ducklings. Yeah.
I'd be interested to know your assessment. Is West Nile really, I don't see as many blackbirds around as I used to. Is West Nile, what's its impact? Is it really decreasing the population of blackbirds? Or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. So a lot of times with different species, so like there is avian influenza as well, in addition to West Nile. And West Nile definitely affects some species. But for some reason, certain species will act as reservoirs. They'll get sick, but it won't actually affect, they won't die, and it won't really affect the population. So, like with avian influenza that comes in, the ducks will get it, but they don't seem to be affected. But shorebirds really are, and other species, and like poultry, and so it affects different guilds differently depending on the disease that you're discussing. For the blackbirds, so I know starlings, they will do some control because I know that they are an issue on some of the dairies and stuff, and so USDA will come in and do some control for those populations, but I'm not sure how West Nile is affecting those populations specifically. Yeah. Yeah.
Spring Wings Festival is not happening this year. Is it going to happen next year, or what's happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So Spring Wings went on for a very long time. I forget how many years. And then we kind of took a break during COVID. And then I think this year we put it on with our partners as well. So NDOW is very involved with the planning, and our partners at Lahant and Audubon Society, they're also very involved. But I think everybody was just kind of stretched a little bit thin this year, and so we just didn't get on it. But I imagine it will continue in the future. It just was a capacity issue this year. There was a lot of transition at other places with people leaving or moving jobs, and not necessarily on the refuge, but with some of our partnerships. So, yeah. Yeah.
The Carson pasture got transferred to the state wildlife, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what they're up to
So,
in that area?
yeah, so they're still in the process of writing what will be kind of their management plan. So that will kind of guide how they manage the wetlands over there at Carson Lake and Pasture. And so part of that transition because it was part of the Bureau of Reclamation, that was kind of included in some of that legislation back in the 90s, where the reason why it was transferred to NDOW was that it would be managed as a shorebird wetland. And so they're trying to figure out how they're going to kind of balance all the various needs and how they want to kind of manage it going forward in the future. So they're still kind of in the planning stages, but right now they are officially doing all the management. So NDOW does all the water deliveries and kind of moves things around. And so they're making plans on an annual level, but doing some more long-term planning currently. So, but nothing. I don't think anything significant is expected to change. They'll still be doing waterfowl hunting and stuff in the winter, or during the hunting season. And so it will kind of be similar to how it's been managed, but I would say, more focused on some of the shorebird stuff. Yeah, Keith.
Do you have any invasive species in the refuge?
We do have lots of invasive species. So we do have invasive plants. So that's some of the spraying and stuff that we do. We have carp are in the wetlands, and those have been introduced, and those can be an issue. They'll get after some of the wetland habitat and kind of destroy the sago crop and stuff. And so we do some management, but it's not like really active. We're not doing like predator control or killing all the carp or anything like that. But we do try to manage the weeds as much as possible.
I'm slimy.
Well, thank you, everyone.